Hey there everybody and welcome to a Blender tutorial series, which is something I don't say very often. I don't make very many series, but in this one, I'm going to be showing you how to do the Spirited Away effect that I talked about in the CG Matter video from beginning to end, going from green screening to setting up the scene to making it look realistic and the volumetric fog and all this. 4-part tutorial series, and in this one we're just going to be talking about taking your green screen footage, actually keying it out, and then doing the, putting it in your 3-dimensional space on a card, which is kind of weird if you haven't seen this before. You're like, wouldn't you want a 3D human? No, that's too hard. So we're going to just put it on a card and kind of fake it with perspective tricks. So let's begin with part 1. Get excited, everybody. So I'm actually going to be using DaVinci Resolve to do the keying. You can use whatever program you want, but DaVinci is free, or you can get the free version and it has everything you need for this. So just get DaVinci if you don't have it. It's way better at stuff like this for keying. So I'm going to be using DaVinci. Here is the source footage I'm going to be using. I'm just like pretending to walk, and let's be honest, I did a pretty good fucking job. It really looks like I'm walking. So it's me in front of a green screen. Let's take care of it. So in DaVinci, I'm going to take my footage, drop it in. And again, this first half is about keying, second half is about getting it inside of Blender. I'm going to take the footage, just bring it into the timeline, and I don't need any audio. I'm just going to select the 4-second section that I like. I don't want the beginning of this because you can see the camera's very barely moving. As you can see, like the doors, like you can tell that it's moving. So I'm just going to go a bit into the footage, find a place that I like, be like, okay, this is, I don't know, 3-4 seconds of walking. That's good. And this is what we want to key. To key it, go into Fusion. There's a way to do it with OpenFX without ever going into Fusion, but don't. We're doing it in Fusion. Inside of Fusion, I'm going to shift spacebar to type in a node. That's how you search. And I'm going to look up, there's a bunch of keyers. In this case, I'm just going to use the Ultra keyer because it's good in most scenarios, especially in green and blue screens. To actually key this out, take the color picker, which is going to say what color am I extracting. Take this and select a section of green. You want to pick one that's representative of your overall green screen. So if you're half your thing's in shadow and half of it's bright, you got to make a decision there. And you can see already we got a key. Issue being 1, the background, and 2, the graininess. We'll take care of both of those. To get rid of the background, here's what I like to do, and you'll see why I do this in a second. I'm going to add in a background node, or just a color node. And I just need to reverse these, so one's in foreground, one's in the background, so you just flip those sockets. And this makes it so that whatever color we're picking is going to show underneath. If I actually pick the color and give it some brightness, you can see it shows beneath, which is good because we want to use this to test some stuff. But also we need to get rid of the background. So I'm going to make a polygon, which is just a mask selection. And I'm just going to select the part of the green screen that I'm occupied in. I cut it very close, by the way. My head's like bobbing up and down. It's almost coming off the green screen. And then I would have had to refilm, and then I probably would have given up on the video. Because if things don't go the way you expect to originally, you're like, time to move on. At least that's the way I am. Either way, we've made a mask. To make it apply, put it in the merge node, and the theory behind this is this mask is saying where the foreground is, and the foreground's the keyed footage. So I'm saying here's where our green screen thing is, and everything else make it a background color, which means that now we can do it like that. This makes it more evident, by the way, that this isn't a very good key, which is why I like having this background thing. I can pick a color to do that kind of thing with. To make the key better, go to the Ultra keyer, go to the matte. So we need to refine the matte, and the main slider we're going to be playing with, and pretty much every time, contract, and expand. I don't know why I said it like a legal document, contract, but you can see as we bring this down, it gets rid of a lot of the fuzz at the expense of kind of ruining the edge of our mask, but that's the price we pay. And you just want to get it low enough that it does the job and not so low that you're like breaking your thing, right? So it's all a compromise, but you really want to make sure there's no flickering anything over here because that's going to make some very big issues in Blender, especially if you have volumetric light passing through. So that looks pretty good. A couple other things I like to do for the key is just add a bit of blur, not too much because it does this, but just a tiny bit of blur. That's just going to soften the edges and on average give us a better key. Yes, there is a bit of flickering on the hair, but what can you do? I didn't light the green screen well. That's just how it is. If you want to go into a bit more detail, you just take this high slider and you can retrieve some of this information. But of course, you might get some of the green screen bleed back. So I'm just going to bring back a tiny bit of detail. Again, main thing I'm looking for is I'm trying to make sure that there is no flickering outside my bounds. It's fine if this hair flickers, whatever, but just make sure that we're good there. So, okay, we have a key. Beautiful. Once your key is set up, make sure you set this to black and you bring the alpha down. You want to see this checkerboard pattern because that indicates that everything except this, human, this very attractive man, is transparent. And once you've done your key, and it will just look like, black over here. So we have a good key. We need to export this in a way that Blender can read, especially the alpha information. So I'm going to deliver this. In other words, I'm going to hit export. For the export options, you have a couple. I would say what you should do is always pick a TIFF. But if you want to pick a QuickTime with like uncompressed codec, so there's an alpha, do whatever you want, okay? I'm going to use TIFF, so I'm going to make an image sequence. Make sure you hit this button. If you do not export alpha, I'm going to come over to your house. I'm going to tell your parents that you didn't do that, and I don't care if you're 50 and your parents are dead, and I'm sorry if that's the case, but they're going to give you a hard time. Make sure to hit export alpha. Only other thing is we just need to set an output path. So I'm just going to make a new folder and I'm going to call this walking sequence. Select folder and I'm just going to call this like walking underscore. So we have a naming convention and hit add to render queue export. So what it's doing is it's going through my footage using the fusion keying that we did and exporting a sequence of TIFFs, which we can see over here. So you can see it's transparent. Perfect. To bring this into Blender in this kind of fashion, here's what we are going to do. I'm going to start with a new project. With a new project, I'm using 3.0 alpha. Shouldn't be different if you're using 2.93 or if in the future you're. Doesn't matter. In Blender, delete everything. We are going to add in a plane. This is where we're going to project our footage in some sense. In our case, the footage is 1920 by 1080, so make sure that, this plane is the right aspect ratio. If you have standard HD 1920 by 1080, you take this number and multiply it by the aspect ratio, which is 1.778. How do I know that number? It's 1920 divided by 1080. It's 1.778. So that's the right aspect ratio. Go to shading, make a material. You can call this the person material. And here's what we're going to do. We need to import in our image sequence. So just image texture node. It's fine. We can load in multiple images on an image texture node. Find your walking sequence. Select everything. By the way, DaVinci does this thing where the numbers are massive. It doesn't matter. Just select everything. Blender will be able to figure out what we mean by this. And if you're seeing this magenta screen of death, just hit auto refresh. And you can see not only do we have the thing, but it's updating frame by frame. If you didn't click auto refresh, it'd be frozen. So auto refresh. And also, I'm going to make sure at a certain point, you're going to see once we go far enough, everything freezes because, we only rendered so many frames. So I'm going to say, I think we did like 110 or so. So make sure you trim your project. Also, frame rate, make sure it matches. Otherwise, it's going to look like you're going in slow-mo. So mine was 30 frames per second. And then finally, we need to add the transparency. Doing this in evening cycles is almost equivalent. What we're going to do is we're going to be utilizing this alpha channel. That you want this to be as clean as possible. So again, make sure there's no flickering. We're going to be using the alpha channel. So I'm going to be using a principled BSDF for this because later on we're going to try to light this person with the environment that we're creating. It's going to make it look more realistic. So use this as the base color for the principled BSDF. Bring up the roughness. We don't want any, weird lighting going on. So bring up the roughness. And then for the transparency, just take alpha and connect it to alpha. Couldn't be simpler. Although, of course it's not working. So to make it work, just go to material, go to blend mode, set this to alpha blend. That's just an Eevee thing. If you were in cycles, you wouldn't have to do this. But what this does is it tells Eevee or look dev mode, hey, if there's alpha, respect it and make it transparent. Okay. So now we have this nice little three-dimensional card, and we can have multiple of me. But of course, you don't want to see it from an angle because it kind of breaks the illusion. And we're going to be talking about that. But You can see it works here, and it also works in Eevee. And again, a key insight here is we're using a principled BSDF, which means even though this is a card, it respects lighting information, which we can use to make things look realistic down the road. Okay, make sure your roughness is high, by the way, if I didn't say that already. I know I did. Okay, so that's looking good. Just make sure that it's also good in cycles, because our final export is going to be a cycles export, but we are going to do a lot of our like scene planning in Eevee just because it's so much faster. But yeah, that is how you get your footage inside of Blender. One more thing, if you're having some issues with the alpha, like it's kind of like passing through, and what I mean by this is like, let's say we have a light here and it's on the other side of it, and in Eevee you can kind of see light bleeding through this. In our case, we don't have that because I keyed it well. But if there's holes in your thing, what you want to do is you want to take your alpha and just multiply it by a number. So we take it. So this is our alpha channel. And I'm going to multiply it and clamp so it doesn't go above 1. Multiply it by some number that's slightly bigger than 1. So if we go to 2, you can see it's going to make our edge a bit harsher because all the alpha has been raised closer and closer to 1. But if you have any holes or whatever in your mesh, this is a good way to fix it. So I think for mine, I actually kept it on 1.2 just to get a bit more harshness back in here, which again, isn't gonna matter since we have so much motion blur, etc. So there you go. That is part 1, getting your green screen footage inside of Blender for any arbitrary project, but in our case, the Spirited Away project. So there you go. That's a tutorial. I just want to mention, especially for people that are watching this the day that it's coming out, Patreon exists, and this whole tutorial series, or at least the next couple parts, have already been uploaded. That's going to be available for patrons for early access. Everybody else has to wait a bit longer, because that way patrons get something, but even if you're not a patron, you eventually get it, so I think it's a fair deal. Patreon exists. It's a place to get early access tutorials, like I just said. It's a place to get exclusive tutorials I upload every once in a while that are not uploaded on YouTube, only for patrons, blend files, etc. So if you want to use this green screen footage, you can download it. Check out Patreon. There's 780 people that think it's a good idea, so maybe you do as well. And I think that's it for part 1. Join me for part 2, where we are going to set up our scene with camera motion, etc.